Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we bring you all the neat things happening in public education, and sometimes not neat things, but we are part of the JP, Kathy, and the Crew Network, and we are ready to get started. One of the things that we like to bring to our educators and parents is information about how we're helping our special needs kids. And in this show, we have with us longtime dyslexia teacher, Miss Lolita Evans-Johnson. And Miss Johnson, you want to talk a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Well, yes, I'd like to just say hello to everyone out there. I'm so excited to be a part of this podcast, Dr. Good. As you know, this month is Dyslexia Awareness Month. And so it's great to be able to just broaden the awareness to everyone out there nationwide. I am a dyslexia therapist, a licensed dyslexia therapist here in Texas. And I've been practicing for a little over 10 years. And I'm also a certified academic language therapist, which is a certification required prior to getting your licensure. So just so excited to be able to work with students that have that challenge of this dyslexia and being able to see them grow and develop and get that light bulb moment. So that's a little bit about me.
You've been doing this for 10 years, so a decade. What changes have you seen over the last decade? Because I will tell you, I've been an educator for 35 years. And dyslexia is a term that's been around a long time.
130 years to be exact.
Oh my goodness. Well, and yet, it was one of those unfunded mandates until very recently. And so I got caught up in that as far as being principal in 2001. We had to do we had to make sure we offered dyslexia, and yet we didn't really have many rules around that. And when I opened up 3 charters back in 2012, so that was, this is 9 years ago, we had to do it. We had parents who asked for it, and yet there were not very many guidelines. So what's happened? Can you tell us a little bit about the development of dyslexia?
Well, it's pretty much been your story. It was kind of a haze to begin with. We knew there was a concern. We knew there were students there that were struggling, but it wasn't defined. The research was still in progress or in process. So over time, it has been made available to us, the research, where initially they thought it was a visual thing and we could use the overlays, and then it became maybe a flipping of the letters, and just as it was continuously researched, it became seen or known as a neurological experience with the kids, where neurologically the connections weren't being made there. So to get back to what you're saying, with that being an understanding, there were advocacy organizations that sprouted up throughout the nation, throughout our state, and pushed for more advocacy within the public school system, because these kids were falling through the cracks. And so as a result of this advocacy on the legislative level, we've been able to see bills passed, laws passed here recently, most recently here in Texas, as of September 2019, where schools are now being funded to provide training for their staff, to provide services for their students that have dyslexia. And we even have a handbook that lays out the largely accepted definition for dyslexia that I can share later.
What I think I heard you say, and which I can support through what I saw at the campus level, is that it really, we knew a need was there, and we blame it immediately. If we saw a little child do a D instead of a B, right? A backwards 4, oh, they must have dyslexia, right? When in fact that could be developmental.
Right.
3 and 4-year-olds, they're going to make those kind of mistakes and actually be developmentally appropriate for their age group. But what
Exactly.
I heard you say was that it was parents. It took parents to drive this attention to the
Mhm.
legislative session. Is that correct?
That is absolutely right. Parents would see these indicators or things in their child or in their personal child developmentally, and would raise issues of concern, but would hit a brick wall with being able to get some support. So they had to gather in numbers, or gather support to go to the legislature and say, hey, we need our school systems to help with training and teaching our kids that have this learning difference. And it then became recognized as something within the school system that the school system needed to address.
You're right. Yeah,
With
you're right. Because schools are overwhelmed anyway. As they've always been underfunded and always overprogrammed, so to speak. The central office or the legislators or the education agency will lay something else on top of a school. And I used to go around to legislators and show them just the table of contents of the report. That just the table of contents was 3.5 pages long of partially funded and unfunded mandates to schools in Texas. And so when it is not hard to imagine that when a parent as an individual went to a school and said, hey, my kid is struggling in literacy and reading, and you guys don't seem to be doing anything about it, the principal really didn't have the power to, or really maybe even the education, the training to understand that what that parent was actually saying to him or her, right?
That is
So
right.
we probably are lucky, I say lucky to have some legislators probably who had dyslexic kids, could maybe relate to that and push it forward. But that is the way that change happens to public schools, is through the legislative process. So let's not belabor that, because that is the way it is, right? How do I know if my child is dyslexic?
Okay. Well, one thing that I tell parents is listen to see if your child can hear rhymes. Like you already mentioned, it's not so much as whether they're flipping the letters or not, because developmentally that can happen with a child that's not dyslexic. But if your student is not able to hear that cat rhymes with rat, or whatever rhyme, onset and rhyme you give them, they're not hearing that. That's a big red flag. Okay, that's a concern, because what has been proven through the research is dyslexia is phonologically and phonemically related to the child's literacy development. Which, what I mean by that is they have problems drawing a connection between that letter and sound connection. So if they can't hear, and English is challenging because we've got these vowels that have more than one sound. So that,
or no sound at all.
exactly. So that makes it challenging. But if they're not making that letter sound connection, then that's a big red flag. That's one thing to look for. So looking for the rhyme, looking for that letter sound connection, being able to manipulate those sounds, recognizing if the b sound is in the initial position or the final position, knowing where they hear that sound. So all of those are concerns, but with those being concerns and recognizing that it is a sound, we have to first eliminate the possibility of hearing being a problem or vision being a problem. So before we go forward, or before a parent were to say, oh, I think my child has dyslexia, we do need to eliminate the possibility of maybe they're not hearing the sound or the rhyme, because they actually have, maybe had a ear infection at an infancy stage, and they have some hearing issues going on. So that's something to be aware of as well as we look for indicators of dyslexia.
Well, business for 35 years, and there's not much that surprises me, but you just surprised me because I did not know that. Not a dyslexia expert, but I've had dyslexia teachers, therapists in my buildings for years when I was principal, and I certainly would not have associated rhyming sounds or the lack thereof to a dyslexic issue. So, wow, okay. So if a parent is doing their normal parenting where they're reading, rhyming stories, and the child is having trouble verbally giving back the rhyme, is that correct?
Well, recognizing the rhyme, recognizing that it does rhyme. So like, the nursery rhymes, if they don't, and if the parent were to say, okay, the cat in the hat, I'm just throwing something out there, and ask, do you hear two rhyming? And first, of course, explain to them that rhyme is that same sound in the ending after the, and may not go in detail as we would in the dyslexia session, but it's after the vowel, that ending sound, part of the vowel, and what follows it. Do those sound the same? And if your child, can't acknowledge yes or no, then that's a big red flag. So it's being able to recognize that is what the indicator is.
At what age would that be appropriate to be looking for? 3, 4?
I would say 4 for sure. 5, it's a big red flag. And I say that because dyslexia is not diagnosed as dyslexia if the child is developmentally where they should be. Okay, so I'm glad you asked that question. A 2-year-old and maybe early 3-year-old may not be able to determine if it's a rhyme or not because they just don't have the understanding or they have not been exposed. But a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, it begins to be a red flag.
And you're talking about 4 and 5-year-olds who have been worked with by their parents and have gone to pre-K programs and been read to and have been exposed to a multitude of different literacy styles. And as opposed to, oftentimes we get kids from poverty who were not read to very much at all. Right. Get a preschool opportunity. Do you run up against kids like that and as 5, 6, 7-year-olds who?
We do.
Who are
but after that initial exposure, even if they haven't had it at a young age, after they've been exposed, say in the beginning of the year, by mid-year, if they're not recognizing those sound letter, connections, if they're not recognizing those rhymes, then that's a red flag too, because that's an indication that maybe those connections are not being made there neurologically. When I share a picture, I love to share this picture with my students. Here's an image of the brain, and let me make sure I can get it where it's angled. But here you have a typical reader, okay? And see how the brain is all lit up? And I tell my kids, that's our goal. We're trying to do our work in our class so that this is what the dyslexic brain looks like. It's not as bright, it's not as lit up, okay? But if we can get more connections made in the brain by the drills and the skills that we do in here, then we can get our brains to look more like this, okay? So I share that because that's a visual, and our students need that visual, interaction with their learning. And then also when parents see that as well, or when adults see that as well, it's like, oh, okay, we're exercising the brain. We're trying to get those connections in the brain so that they can make those rhyming connections. They can say, okay, the A can say ah, it can say it can say a, it can, it can all, it can make, did you know A has 5 sounds? Most of our students that don't have dyslexia don't know that, but they don't need to know that. Our dyslexic students need that explicit training to understand that, okay, I've got these options, which option works, and that the brain can then work for them.
So I'm a parent, and I did have my child read to or read to them. I tried to make sure they read to me. I put them in preschool, and now they're in pre-K or kindergarten, and I'm getting a call from the school. Should I be concerned?
Getting a call regarding them
Struggling in reading.
As a parent, absolutely. However, the next question would be, what can we do? What type of intervention can take place to fill in the gap? It may not be dyslexia. It just may be some gaps that need to be filled in. So with that in mind, depending on what the structures of the school is, if they have the RTI program, or just what they have to intervene, some type of intervention should take place, for sure.
And let's say the school doesn't call, and I feel like I have a child who is struggling with reading. Maybe this is my second or third child, and they're just not reacting or reading at the level that my previous kids did, with the type of, when I say intervention, early literacy practices that of the pre-K, of reading to them from birth, all of that. What do I do at the school level?
Well, as a parent, always speak up. You can go to the teacher and say, these are my concerns. This is what I notice Johnny, my son, is not doing or is doing. What can I do at home to help him, or help him fill in that gap? So either you'll get a call from the school, as you mentioned, or you can, as a parent, call the school. The next step would be for a meeting of all those that have a interest in that learning development of that child, to get together and come up with a plan of intervention. That can be as simple as just having some additional assistance in the classroom setting. That could be a pull-out situation. So I hope I'm addressing.
So let me ask you, you're making me ask, is the school responsible for responding to a parent that has reached out and said, I sense something is different about my second child, my third child, that, I mean, basing it on, anecdotal information, and yet does that trigger a need for the school to respond?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we're required to respond. And the initial response may be just an informal screening, where we go in and just informally screen for these indicators, check for the rhyming, check for the recognition of the letters. I have had students in 4th and 5th grade that actually could not say the alphabet without singing it. So what that says is, maybe they don't have maybe they can't recognize the alphabet. And you think, wait a minute, by that time, they should be able to do that. Well, what dyslexic kids are actually very smart kids. Intellectually, they have what it takes to figure out ways to mask what they can't do or what they don't know. And so as a result, they can kind of matriculate through the system and go unnoticed. So yes, we as educators are responsible for taking action if a parent were to say, okay, I have these concerns. So it would possibly begin with, like I said, an informal screening, which in the state of Texas actually is required 1st grade now. 1st and kindergartners are required to have some type of dyslexia screening.
Is that part of the last legislative session, the new statutes?
Actually, before the funding part, yes.
Well, that's good to know, because we don't always have parents who recognize that their child may have early literacy issues. What do those services entail? Let's say that somehow the parent connected with the school, the child had an initial test assessment, and they do qualify for services. What do those services look like?
Okay, well, if they do qualify for services, then we offer dyslexic therapy 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, for about 45 minutes in very, very small groups. It cannot be a large classroom type setting because then it waters down the benefit of the session. And what those sessions would entail was initially identifying what the learning modality is of that child. So each child leaves the class or leaves dyslexia training knowing whether they're a visual learner, an auditory learner, a kinesthetic learner, and we call that the VAC. And we do an assessment to help them figure out, how do I learn best? Because we know that if we give them that tool or that understanding of how they learn best, then they can better advocate for themselves, be it in dyslexia therapy, be it in science class, be it in math class. They can tell their teacher, you know, Miss Smith, Miss Johnson, I'm a visual learner. And with that single bit of information, the teacher knows, okay, little Johnny, little Mary, you know, they learn best by seeing it. They need to see it. Whereas if it's a kinesthetic learner, they learn best by getting into it, doing some type of activity, getting their hands involved, you know. So initially, that's what we do. We make sure they have that understanding. And then from that, we follow what research has proven, an Orton-Gillingham approach to their learning. And that Orton-Gillingham has some specific characteristics that I'd like to mention. It's direct, it's explicit, meaning, you know, as I mentioned earlier, that A has 5 sounds. So I need to explicitly explain and help them to understand what those sounds are and to work with them with those sounds. It's multisensory. So that's where the knowing what your learning modality is. You get involved in all the senses in the learning process. It's structured, sequential, diagnostic, and prescriptive. Key, very key, important in working with students with dyslexia, in that it's diagnostic and prescriptive. In other words, if this student, for example, part of that training is in the alphabet, okay? Being able to manipulate the alphabet, being able to alphabetize. Right now with, you know, literacy, technological literacy, kids have gotten away from maybe a physical dictionary. But believe it or not, learning that skill of finding a word in a dictionary instead of saying, hey, Google, what does this mean? Helps that student, helps that dyslexic child with sequencing, helps that dyslexic child with being able to actually read fluently, because sequencing is kind of the precursor, or is the precursor of fluency. So these types of skills that we develop in the dyslexic sessions help them build upon their literacy training.
So lots of questions as you were talking. First of all, what class do they leave to come to you for 45 minutes? How do they make that time up in that content area that they left 4 days a week?
Excellent question. We try to pull them from their reading class, their literary class, their literacy class, because we're working with them on those skills. So if you got a child that can't read, then they're already struggling and they need that intervention. So we make an effort to make sure that we're pulling them from that class. We don't pull them from science, we don't pull them from math, those content areas.
You work closely with the teachers do you have to give grades? I mean, how is that connection so that the child senses that there is a plan of action that everybody knows?
It is not, dyslexia therapy is not a graded class. It's either needs more practice or has mastered, has passed. Okay, so it's either one or the other. They either need more practice or they've mastered a certain skill. With that being said, they take what they've learned in their dyslexia sessions and then apply it to their other content classes. For example, I have my older students bring vocabulary in that maybe they've read in a book and when I say reading a book, I encourage my students to get the audio version of books and follow along as it's being read to them. And if they come across a word that's read to them or that they read that they don't know, jot it down, bring it to class, and we'll use some of the strategies that we've learned to code those words so that they can see how they can apply what they've learned in coding to their everyday content classes and learning in those classes.
And so how long does all this take? Let's say we caught them in kinder or first grade. We're starting to do the testing, the mandatory testing at that time. How long does it take for them to work their way through the process of learning to read more comfortably?
I'm going to be honest with you, largely depends on the student. Okay, all of our students are, they have their individual progress, individual, timeline in which they. But that being said, programs will take 3 to 3.5, 4 years, depending on the student. We've had some to go through quicker, but keep in mind, it's brain development, believe it or not. It's brain connections that we're trying to make. So it takes many repetitions. I liken it to the analogy of a country road as opposed to maybe an interstate highway. The brain starting out as a little country road, not many connections, okay? Not many towns and cities and things along the way. But as we make those connections, as we work with those students, it develops into a highway. And then that brain develops into an interstate. And before you know it, you have all those connections, lots of little cities along the way that, that you can get off. So if you can take that visual and apply it to the brain developing with this dyslexic intervention, then you kind of understand it takes time, but it's time well worth it because they can then become learners that instead of learning to read, they read to learn.
You ever have students, this is one of those questions where you say, of course, that actually develop a passion for reading after this? I mean, they're struggling and they're probably coming off and hating reading because they know they're not good at it. And so what's a success story or two that you've had or that you continue to have?
Well, to be honest with you, I got a student this year that I encouraged him. I said, what are you interested in? What are some things that you like to do? What are some things that what are some of your hobbies? What fascinates you? What kind of gets you motivated to find more out, or find things more out about a particular subject or topic? And he found something. And now, just yesterday, I was up last night reading about, and I won't disclose what, but that's how they develop a passion for reading. I think is discovering first what they're most interested in, and then realizing that there's a world of information out there that they have access to that they can learn more about. And true enough, he is listening to these books. It's an audio source that he's listening to them through, but he's excited about doing it, excited about wanting to do it. And then he's bringing back vocabulary that he can expand his own personal vocabulary as a result of. So
it's always heartwarming to have those success stories. And I hope that you really have more than not, because that's why you're in the business, right? But
absolutely.
So let me ask you, what's happened now with COVID? How in the heck do you do this type of instruction remote?
Woo, good. I can tell you, March of last year, April of last year, I was like, and I wasn't alone. We were just like, what are we gonna do? Because you know, I work with students with dyslexia. It's so hands on. You know, it's as a matter of fact, now that we are virtual, you know, all of my sessions they have to be live. You know, there's no asynchronous dyslexia training, you know, or intervention. That just does not exist. It is synchronous, and the students have to be there, and we have to interact, and they have to have their videos on because I need to see how their mouth forms certain letters. They need to see how my mouth forms certain letters. You know, we have to determine if a sound is voice, so we have to, you know, be able to touch our throats and feel a vibration and see if it's voiced or unvoiced. So virtually, it's very interactive. I find myself as a therapist having to explain details that maybe I could just, you know, go over to them and show them when they were face to face, you know. So it is a challenge, but yet we've been able to overcome that challenge in some ways, and I'm still learning. Went to a lot of training over the summer just in how to make that more applicable virtually for our students. But it's a work in progress.
So now we have both, though. Now your school, I believe, has both face-to-face and remote students. So now you're supposed to be wearing a mask. So talk a little bit about how you're doing that facial, you know, reading lips and all that when everybody's wearing a mask.
Okay, so what I have to do, because I have a session that I have a student there face to face, and then all of his classmates are virtual. So I have to put the screen back. I have to step back, you know, 6 feet, and pull it down real quick so that he can see and they can see how my lips are shaped, and then put it back up and then make that sound. Okay, so it's, you know, it's kind of a working with it to make it work kind of thing. And then the student that I have face to face, of course, he has to do the same thing. Pull it down, just let me see it, you know, and I'm standing 6 feet back, and then put it back up, and just so that I can see that. Of course, the students virtually, they don't have to do all of that. But yes, we have to, you know, make it work. And
well, it sounds like actually it's almost easier now to do virtual because nobody has to wear a mask in the virtual setting, right? At first, you're thinking, oh no, and now it's not like, oh no, now I got to do face-to-face with masks. What the heck do I do now? So
I'm sorry, Dr. Good, I cannot hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
My last question for you is, how can parents support your work in two ways? One is the early years. What can parents be doing in the early years to get to the point where they either have some good early literacy skills in their kids or see that there's an early literacy issue, and then if they are diagnosed with dyslexia, what do they do to support your work at home?
Okay. From the home front, the biggest thing, the best thing that parents can do is read with their kids. Okay. They need to hear that oral language. They need to hear the flow of the words. That, you know, there's so much that they can pick up just by hearing the reading of a book. And then just knowing that, you know, hey, we read from left to right. We turn the pages. You know, all of those mechanics that we take for granted really make a difference with our students' literacy skills. You know, we read from the top of the page going down to the bottom, you know, those type of things that they can pick up on just by reading to them. Another thing that a lot of parents don't think about, and maybe, you know, kids don't either, but we can put those closed captions on the television, and they can read along as they're watching, you know, Sesame Street or, you know, whatever they're watching, you know, any educational or National Geographic or whatever they're watching, just to see the words, see the English language, and to be able to follow along. That could be a benefit. Um,
those are really good strategies, actually. And so that's for early literacy. What, let's say they are diagnosed, what do they do to support work? Do they need to be checking with you? Could you give them, can you give them strategies, or just, I mean, what can a parent do to support your work?
the biggest thing that they can do is encourage them to find an interest and to learn more about it and to come tell them about it. That oral interaction about what they're reading about and what they're learning makes a big difference. As far as what we do in their dyslexic sessions, you know, as far as teaching them how to code the different words, that's more of a strategy that the student would use as an individual, but they can share that with their parents. The parent just being open to what they're learning can make all the difference in the world, because that just shows support from the home front. Maybe the student even teaching the parent how to code a word. It can be encouraging for the student, because it's like, yes, I understand this to the point that I can teach mom how to do it. You know, I can teach dad how to do it. So those are activities that they can do from the home front, and things that they've taken from class that they can take home.
So you made me think of something about them teaching their parents. Is it normal for dyslexia to be genetic?
Oh, yes. I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to mention that earlier as far as an indicator. It can be hereditary. If a sister or brother or mom or dad or grandparent, you know, has had dyslexia, then the likelihood is that it falls in families. So yes, that is something to be aware of and to address if that's the case.
Who are some famous people that you know who are do you ever stop being dyslexic? I don't know. You learn the coping strategies to overcome it, certainly. I know one, the Fonz, and
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to hear him at a teacher conference, and his story was terrific. German, you know,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I know of one, the Fonz, and I heard him in conference, and he came from German stock. His dad was a tough German man, and they had high expectation for their children in that home, and he wasn't meeting that, and so he was labeled a failure by his own parents. And the fact that he ended up doing everything that he has is commendable to him as a you know, as an individual. Can you name any other famous people that have overcome dyslexia?
Oh, I can rattle off a list, because my kids get excited when they find out, you know, oh, really? They had dyslexia? We've got Muhammad Ali, we've got Whoopi Goldberg, we've got Steven Spielberg, we've got Cher, we've got Albert Einstein, we've got Thomas Edison, we've got JFK, we've got Winston Churchill. So, I mean, the list goes on. And what that speaks to, Dr. Good, is dyslexia. Some of the strengths of dyslexia is that the individual that has it, they have a creative side. They have a way of looking at things that those that don't have dyslexia may not look at it. You know, it's like a different view. And so they're able to stretch their creativity and excel in the creative arena. Picasso, Leonardo da Vinci, you know, some of our great artists were dyslexic. So
wow, that's impressive.
Oh yes, and when our students hear about that even excites them more. It motivates them to think, oh wow, I can take the strengths that I have and really grow beyond where I am. So.
Well, I have a feeling that you are an extraordinary dyslexic teacher, because you've touched on some things, like making sure that you're touching them holistically as a whole child. It's just not, you know, jamming some literacy skills into their head and forcing connections. It sounds like you're trying to get them to do the understand what their interests are, go find something you're interested in. Here's some interventions you can use to get to the information, so that getting to the information is not part of the problem anymore, right?
Right.
So, thank you for that. You're a wonder, and I love your spirit and your energy that you bring to the kids. So thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely. I tell you, I call them my babies.
I'm sure you
I
do.
enjoy working with them, and just seeing them develop and blossom is just an inspiration. And most important though, seeing that light bulb go on is just really what I strive to.
Right. That's that teacher reward. That's why
Yes.
you showed up at school, right? All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you being on and sharing with us. And why do parents need to know this? There's so many pieces that parents and other educators, by the way, other educators can take what you're saying and apply it to their work. Oftentimes, we tend, as educators, to compartmentalize everything, right? I'm science, I'm math, but we need to think of our students as having one brain that needs to make sense of all of this. And so helping kids make connections, and that's what you do, right? In all content areas is our work as teachers and parents. So you have given us a lot of information for both educators and parents and grandparents, because so many grandparents are now either full-time or part-time caretakers for their kids and their grandkids. So thank you for that. And you've been wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Good. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. Well, speaking of being able to do school at home and school at school, let's talk about what kind of access do our kids across the country have to internet and a device. So which students have the biggest home internet gap for students? And so unfortunately, sometimes we hear the same states over and over. Mississippi, Arkansas, and New Mexico have the highest percentages of students who lack adequate home technology for remote learning. It says a new analysis from the National Education Association. This is the largest teacher union, worked with a research firm called Public Policy Associates to synthesize the 2018 census data on household internet and digital devices. And so the group found that these figures approximate the number of students who don't have internet access or working digital access, or both, at home. And of course, the numbers may have changed after COVID. We're hoping that some of these states understood the urgency of getting internet and devices to their kids during the pandemic, right? But at the time that the data was collected, only 54% of students in Mississippi, 58% of Arkansas students, and 63% of New Mexico students had both home internet and a device. By contrast, we had 13 states who had more than 80% of students who met that NEA minimum threshold for remote learning capability. 10 of those states were up north, interestingly enough, and that includes top three: New Hampshire at 87%, Massachusetts at 85%, and Connecticut with 84%. NEA also reports that 12 million of our kids nationally don't have technology at home to stay engaged in remote or hybrid learning. And of course, which groups of students, it's not going to be a surprise here, but we need to keep hammering this home for a lot of reasons. The inequity in our school systems are fierce and consistent. Let me know in the comment section if any of this surprises you. As always, wanting participation from you guys as you listen is part of what I enjoy working with and responding to. So please put your comments and your questions to this information so that you can be a participant in our show. So which group of students are most likely to lack full access? Native American Alaska Native children, which is 50%. Children in households below the federal poverty level, 47%. Some of these, of course, will be overlapping. Children whose parents are renters, 37%. Black children, 36%. Hispanic Latinx children, 34%. Children whose parents don't have a bachelor's degree, 34%. And children in households with at least one unemployed parent, 30%. How's that? And so what solutions are recommended for this gap? The National Committee to Universal Broadband Access, a national commitment. So NEA is asking for a national commitment to universal broadband access, which of course is also supported by district leaders and principals. A national committee working on this to get the national commitment to getting digital access and internet access in every K-12 student home. More aggressive school-level efforts to document the students' home technology situations. And so it's not just, so I guess what I'm hearing is that schools need to be more committed to making sure that those kids that aren't coming face-to-face, or if their grade level is fully remote, like a lot of high schools are still fully remote, if we don't have students who are getting on either regularly or at all, there needs to be some door knocking. There needs to be an understanding on the part of the school that we have to find those students. We cannot let those students fall through the cracks. More federal funding and support for schools to tackle these gaps, that would always be nice. More emphasis among teachers on instructional plans that work for all students regardless of technology access. So let's say that you do have kids who are high schoolers, their high school has not gone back, and they don't have broadband, they don't have a device, one or the other or both, then there needs to be a packet still until that is solved. Now, many districts have solved that by, for example, in Texas, we had a plan that was done by the Texas Education Agency in collaboration with some of our tech providers, and the schools, the districts were able to buy technology devices and hotspots for half the price. And so that's been a good way of getting additional devices and broadband into the homes of our kids without access. And more robust racial bias training for educators to ensure that learning environments, whether at home or at school, that they still understand that we need to pay attention to our kids of color. We need to pay attention to our kids from poverty so that we give equal access to all. And that is, if you're not reading that about equity, then you're hearing it from me on a consistent level. If this is the only place you're getting your education news from, then at least you're getting it consistently from me. So some of you are saying, well, I'm a white parent, okay? And so chances are you're not having, the chances are greater you're not in poverty, you have a device for your child, and you have broadband in the home. Not every single white parent does that, but you have a better chance of having that for your child. But making sure that we still understand that we have inequities in our school systems, in our communities, is an important understanding for white parents to have. And so, speaking of inequities, an interesting article came out this week based on the San Diego Unified School District, and they have decided to do some grading policy changes, which are to be more equitable and less punitive. And so I thought I would bring this to your attention because I'm sort of surprised to hear that California is still doing this, because normally California rides the wave at the front of the wave as far as making things equitable and good for kids. But no longer will academic grades be based on how well a student behaves. It will only be based on how much a student knows on a subject. Now, some of you are saying, what? Hasn't that always been the way? Evidently not in San Diego Unified. Starting this school year, San Diego Unified will eliminate non-academic factors such as student behavior from academic grades following a unanimous vote by the school board Tuesday to overhaul the district's grading policies. The changes are partly to address racial and other disparities in current grading practices, officials said. District data have shown that Black, Hispanic, Native American, and Pacific Islander high school students are significantly more likely to be given a D or an F. Black students received D or F grades 20% of the time. Hispanic students reached them 23% of the time, while white students received them 7% and Asians 6%. And this is some data from the first semester of last year, so this is very recent data. And so the interesting part for me is that we have, at least in the districts that I've been in, and certainly districts I have overseen, that grades are to be something that are used cautiously. For example, in my district, a 69, even a 68 or a 69 does not tell me a story about the child. The 68 or 69 tells me the story about the teacher effort to get the child to pass. Oftentimes, teachers don't like to hear that because they tend to want to put the blame on the child. But if we buy into the concept, and again, I've written an article on this in LinkedIn. I have several articles there that you might understand my educational philosophy. But it is my belief that 100% of the issues that kids have, whether in school or at home, are based on an adult or some adults. It could be that there is a perfectly wonderful set of parents with bad teacher. You could have a perfectly good set of parents, and you could have, the bad uncle or the bad neighbor. There is some adult or adults that are causing trauma in our kids, and when that trauma is not resolved, then there's a void that causes the child to act out. And so one of the hardest parts about schooling, from my standpoint, is training our adults who are in front of our kids to understand that when kids act out, that they're sending us a message we need to receive. And so this is, again, I'm surprised that it's taken California this long to come to the conclusion that they should take behavior out of grades, because there's always been a box on the report card that says, how's the child's behavior, satisfactory, not satisfactory. You can have an A student with unsatisfactory behavior. It's uncommon, but you can have it. You can have a kid that's so smart and so bored that they ace everything and still act out and smart mouth or ignore teachers or whatever. They get good grades, they can pass the test, but they're so bored that they act out. And so we have to be looking and be open to the messages that kids are sending us as adults, whether parents, whether teachers, administrators. Administrators can be just as guilty of not listening to kid behavior as a teacher. But there's just no way that we have that we should blame a child's content knowledge for being bad when in fact they had the knowledge, they just didn't have the behavior that we thought they should have. And we'll talk more on that in the future. Just as a reminder, put your comments, put your questions in the comments. Be interactive with us over the course of the show so that I can be interactive with you too. And I can answer your questions, or our guests can answer your questions. But I'm trying to, one podcast at a time, change the way that podcasts are received. I don't want you to be passive audience. I don't want you to be um, sitting back and just receiving. I want you to interact with the information because, frankly, that's how brains work. Much like Miss Johnson was saying that about making connections in the brain, I need for you all to make connections with the information you're hearing during each show by interacting with it, by asking questions around it, giving comments around it, so that your learning is enhanced. You come as adult learners to my show, and so my job is to leave you after an hour with some maybe hopefully new understandings, some better understandings about what's going on in public education. And in this case, in today's show, how to help your child, and not only if you think that they're dyslexic, but anything that they're struggling with. I really didn't get to the point where I could have asked more questions about dysgraphia and some other learning disabilities, but we'll do those in future shows. But just know that the information you got today should not only be heard by parents of dyslexic students, but they should be heard by parents to say, so that's how they do it with dyslexia, but I'm seeing this. And so I'm going to understand now that I'm an advocate for my child, and I'm going to go to the school and very professionally start asking questions about what we can do to resolve some of the things we're seeing. And if the school is not being professional back, and occasionally it happens, we have humans that are at schools just like we have humans at home. And so if you're having trouble with that, please know that I am here to help you. If you have a school anywhere across the country, because all the problems are really the same, school to school, pop me an email, go to the Ask Dr. Be Good Facebook page. There's a click there for sending me an email. Send me an email with the issue, and I'll give you some professional language to help with, and hopefully that'll take that short of a response and opportunity for you to get some words. But otherwise, we'll do some more. But so many times it just means sitting down and professionally dialoguing around the issue. And sometimes adults find that hard to do. Sometimes adults find that hard to do at the school level because some of them feel that they are the keepers of all the knowledge, and so do as I say, right? But those good schools with good administrators and good teachers who are open to what the parent is saying, what the teacher, what the child is saying through their behavior, those are the schools that are going to have the best impact on children. So, as always, it's a fast hour, and we've come to the end of our show. Don't forget to contact your legislators. We are in that legislative season, where we have time to go to our legislators and thank them, first of all, for funding schools and keeping schools open during COVID, paying our teachers, paying our support staff, paying our administrators, and then also making sure they understand that you expect them not to cut funds from public education if that comes up in their next legislative session. If you need more help with that, again, hit the click button on the email and let me know how I can help you with that. Take care, everyone. Write your comments and your observations, and we'll see you again next week. And don't forget, it's rebroadcast at 6 p.m. on Thursdays, just in case you didn't catch it Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. Goodbye, everyone.